So, tonight we are super proud to welcome our special guest, Martin Aguinis, who is the marketing lead for Flutter at Google. You may have seen him in many videos online, including the new Flutter Widgets 101 series. He's stopping by New York on his way home from London, where he helped organize the Flutter Live event. And so let's give him a warm Flutter NYC welcome.
All right, thanks so much. Thanks, Martin, for organizing this, and thank you so much, everyone, for being here on Friday night. I know there's a lot of excitement happening with Flutter, but there's also a lot of other things happening in New York, so really appreciate you being here. So before I get started, as I was putting these slides together, I realized I actually have no idea what level of familiarity everyone has with Flutter or with mobile apps or Google. So I just wanted to get a little bit of a sense of that, so then I can maybe adjust the presentation to fit the audience. So who here is working on some sort of Flutter project? Okay, great. Who here is a mobile app developer? Okay. What about a developer in general? Any sort of developer? Okay. Any more business focus or yeah? All right, great. Who here knows very little about Flutter? Okay, great. And who here was able to catch Flutter Live this week? Awesome. All right, so there's a good mix. We'll try and therefore go kind of both a little bit high level briefly and then deep dive into certain parts too, and we'll definitely leave some room for questions as well. One of my favorite parts is just getting to see what type of questions you have and obviously hope to answer them. If not, I have luckily some other people on the team that can help. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start, actually one more thing, who's ever heard one of my talks before, whether online or in person? Okay. Great. So some of you might have seen a few of these slides already, but what I want to do is I want to just first start by talking a little bit about the mobile landscape in general and why Google cares so much about Flutter and innovating in that space. Then we'll talk about Flutter Live and some of the announcements we heard. Then we'll hear from Will Larsh from our team, who runs our material design and Flutter collaborations, done excellent work, and Will was on stage as well at the event. We'll also hear from Clay about his experience with Flutter, and then we'll take some questions. So let's get started. I want to start with this fact, which is that from 2016 to 2022, the global app economy is growing from $1.31 trillion to $6.35 trillion. Absolute numbers for me are sometimes hard to conceptualize, so that's number, $6.35 trillion, is like saying every human being on this planet has to contribute $835. This is partly because the number of apps actually growing, downloaded are growing as well. As you can see in this chart, 2018 we have about 205 billion downloads a year. That's going to grow to about 258 billion in 2022. Pretty crazy. Now this is another really interesting study, which is taking the top 1,000 mobile apps versus the top 1,000 mobile web properties. In other words, apps and the mobile web done very well because it's the top of the top. And if you compare those along the same range, you'll realize that there's a 10x in terms of the time spent on mobile apps. So it's really important to have good experience on apps, and when done right, they can engage users very well. And something we did as Google, one of the studies we did, was trying to understand how do you boost apps usage, right? If everyone knew the answer to that, none of us would be here today, right? So the study results had a consistency of eliminating friction, which means making it a lot easier for your users. Very simple designs, somewhat intuitive. Sometimes you look at apps. My first app back in college that I made was basically like an Uber for the fraternity sorority systems called ReadRide. And the way it worked is you would press a button and it would help you get to the organization. And at first we had like 5 tabs in there, and it was really hard to use. Then we realized who our target demographic was for this app, and we realized, wait a minute, we only need 1 button, right? Make it very simple, 1 use case, and that's it. But that's something we saw in the study too, which is simplicity, like intuitiveness, being consistent across devices. That's not very easy to do, right? And again, if you've seen this before, maybe don't say a number, but if you haven't, let's play a little game of roulette to try and understand the challenges in the mobile space. So can someone yell out a number 0 through 36?
25.
25. All right, let's test your luck tonight. Let's see. If we get 25, maybe you can come up here and give the rest of this talk. All right, 17. So you didn't get it right. But don't worry, you only had a 3% chance of getting that number right. And according to AskFlyer, only about 3% of users remain active on an app after 30 days. So if we were to take an average app from any Play or iOS store, and 100 people were to download it today, only around 3 of them would be active users after a month. So it's like playing a game of roulette, right? But that's not the only challenge we have with mobile. A lot of you might be familiar with some of these challenges. On the business side, we have things like time to market. You know, I had a great idea. By the time I executed on it, there's already 15 apps like it. Fragmentation and agility, right? Especially with different app stores nowadays. Having to coordinate between your designers and your developers and having 2 split code bases. And also testing and prototyping. A lot of times you just want to build out the concept and start iterating from it instead of having to invest thousands of dollars into making an app. Some of the technical reasons, which you all might be familiar with, and one of the reasons people really like Flutter, are having to have split code bases. So if you have to make an app as a brand, in the US, it's 50-50 Android iOS market penetration. In the rest of the world, it's about 80% Android, 20% iOS. So still, a ridiculous amount of users are using both. So obviously, many times brands have to have those. But even let's assume you have to just have one. Let's just assume you only want to make an iOS or Android because you're biased. I have both phones, so I'm testing it on. I'm not that biased. But even if you have to have one, you still have to coordinate between the designers and the developers. So a designer will make this beautiful app, on InDesign or on Sketch, and give it to the developer, and then the final product, they'll be like, what happened? This is not exactly how I wanted it. They had to make compromises. A few other problems there. So in other words, this is my favorite visualization that describes this dilemma. So on the left, you can see what 80% of people nowadays still do, which is develop 2 separate iOS and Android applications. Right? And at the end, you get that castle. But that maze represents a lot of those challenges that I just said. Right? It takes a lot more time. You have to get double the effort. So what's the alternative before Flutter? Well, you can use a traditional third-party or cross-platform solution. Now, we'll dive a little bit into technologically why this is, but long story short, most solutions like PhoneGap, Cordova, React Native, a lot of them use JavaScript. So essentially, you're passing a bridge, you're building it in a web language, and it's converting it to native code. So you're not technically building a native site or a native app, and so that means that in that process, it slows the app down sometimes, it's just not fully native. And we've all been there where, nowadays we all have such high expectations in our apps that we assume it's going to scroll a certain way or do some behavior, and then, when it does, of course, we're not very grateful for it, but when it doesn't, forget ever using that app again, especially with the 3% number I gave you. So that's where Flutter comes in, right? And it's funny because I was giving a talk to someone this a year ago, and even at Google, people were like, what's Flutter, right? And it's amazing to see the amount of just awareness that has grown from it. And now as a marketer, my challenge no longer becomes raising awareness. That's always a challenge, but it's also making sure we are clearly articulating the value proposition, and clearly articulating what Flutter is for. And as you'll hear from the keynote that happened, it's beyond mobile. But I thought what I'd do is I'll show you a quick sizzle reel that we made at 1 minute of this past week and the event, and then I'll go through the rest. So let's see if this works. Great. So here's some pictures from the event itself. That claw machine on the left. I was in Shanghai, China, and we went into this place called Big Pink, and it's 5 stories of just claw machines. Everything's pink. And when I'm there, I'm like, we have this mascot called Dash, which some of you might have, and I'm like, that would be so cool if we had it. So as a joke, I pitched it to our events coordinator. I'm like, hey, we should have a claw machine at the event. 2 months later, I get a deck to like approve some of the branding, and they're like, oh, this is where we're gonna place the claw machine. I'm like, no way. No way. I show up, there's a claw machine for these dashes, and the line is literally out the door. That was the most popular thing. So if you have an idea and you think it's stupid, pitch it, I promise you. Great advice. But anyway, this was the event, and it was great. But I think the most incredible part about this was not the physical event, but this was a global launch. And at Google, usually we have dev summits like the Chrome, Android, dev summits, and a lot of the focus goes on these physical events. But we understand that most people can't make it there. And I know a lot of you were in this New York City meetup this week, and I heard it was a lot of fun, and you had your own cheering crowd going with certain moments, and I'm sure you had much more candid feedback than the one we heard at the event itself. But it was amazing because we had over 150 viewing parties around the world, just people getting together, watching this. And we actually did a My Flutter Story campaign where we had people submit their Flutter story from around the world, and it was amazing to see the diverse responses, and that's something that we're very proud of with Flutter. So thank you all for tuning in, those that did, and those that didn't. The last few days for me and my team has been all about the recap videos and reporting, so now we have a nice 10-minute keynote. So if you don't have the hour, you can watch the 10-minute version, which is kind of all the highlights, and skips out the part where Matt and Emily miraculously finished coding an app in like 10 minutes. It's pretty incredible. So that was it. That was the event, Flutter 1.0. So I thought today, for some of those that didn't get to watch it, why don't we do Flutter 1.0 in 10 minutes? So I'm going to give you the abridged version of Flutter 1.0. And after that, I'll bring up Will to give a little bit more deep dive into some of the actual code and the demos that we showed. All right? Hopefully no one's timing, because I'd never time myself here, but I really think I can keep it under 10 minutes. We'll see. Great. So when we describe Flutter, we use 4 pillars to describe Flutter. Flutter is beautiful, Flutter is fast, Flutter is productive, and Flutter is open. By beautiful, Flutter moves everything because you basically control over every pixel on the screen. So unlike general mobile app development with Flutter, everything you write, every line of code is actually what shows up on the final app. There's no process between what you're coding and what you're, as a developer or a designer, and what's actually showing up on the phone. Well, what that means is you have full control. This is a canvas. You're basically an artist. And you're able, as you can see from this example that I think came in like 2 days, I saw it 2 days on Twitter before the event, but people are just making these beautiful interfaces. And you saw the statistics on how much time individuals spend on mobile apps. So given that, being able to have these experiences make a huge difference for organizations, for even smaller apps or startups. And so you basically don't have a compromise between the designers and developers, and Will definitely talk more about that. The second one is that it's fast. So we use this high-powered graphics engine called Skia, and Flutter compiles ahead of time. So basically all the apps are running over 60 frames per second. So they're incredibly quick. We've seen things like these gaming apps, 2 Dimensions, which I'll talk about in a bit, are able to do all these amazing animations, and you don't have to compromise. I mean, we've all been in that situation where it's an airline app, but some sort of app where you're like, oh, what is this janky app or this scrolling, right? We've all been there, and you're waiting in the streets and you're just waiting for something to scroll or load, and we don't want that, right? We want it to be really, really fast. The third one is productive. We introduced something called stateful hot reload. What stateful hot reload is it allows you to literally paint an app to life. So you write the Flutter code, or Dart code, and within milliseconds, you press a button and the app will change. So you are literally can have a designer and developer sit next to each other and say, okay, move this 1 pixel to the right, the hot reload, and it moves. What happens in other developments is move this 1 second to the right, okay, hot reload, oh, something broke. Come back in 10 minutes, let me recompile it, let me port the app, let me see what happens. That doesn't happen with Flutter. Let's say that something does happen and the app breaks. It's stateful, which means it doesn't lose state. There is a video of me talking about stateless widgets, shameless plug, but if you didn't see it, the way it works is if you break part of the app, let's say this button broke, then only that, only that part of it would, so the app is still running, only that part would stop working, and then you can quickly hot reload with the fix. So it's really easy to find that. As you can see here, what's happening is we're changing the word clicked to pushed, and when that happens, we press hot reload, and in 654 milliseconds, it changes. But also what's interesting is the business logic also changes. So we're now changing it so that instead of adding, it subtracts. And that works as well. Finally, open. One of the things we're most proud of is that Flutter is free and open source. It's completely free and open source, and same with the community. So Flutter is an open project. What we mean by that, as Will mentioned, that doesn't always happen on private APIs, is we are very open to the community, and we have so many contributors that are outside of the Flutter team and outside of Google. So we've had thousands of packages and plugins that people like yourselves wrote for your apps and then put in Flutter for other people to use, whether it's widgets or different platform APIs. So that's really exciting because a lot of times, one of us will be giving a talk and we'll be like, oh, I'm not sure if that exists. We will go on GitHub or Stack Overflow, we look it up, and someone's already written something for it. So what's new with Flutter 1.0? A lot of you have already raised your hand saying you've already been following Flutter. And we've heard your feedback, and we really care about that. So these are some things we know that are very important and that we've been working on that are new in this release. I won't name all of them, but I think giving iOS a lot of love is important. A lot of times you want to have that brand-centric design, meaning like the Hamilton app, for example, looks very much like a Hamilton app. It doesn't look like an Android or iOS app, but a lot of apps do want to have that Android and iOS feel, and we'll talk about that in a sec. But we also have things like adding to existing applications. A lot of people are like, oh, I'd love to use Flutter, but I already have an app. I have good news for you. That's what Alibaba did, actually. And you can basically make certain parts of your app, whether you want to redesign the home screen and make it more beautiful, but not lose all your users and have to make an app from scratch. You can do that. I'm definitely going to go over 10 minutes if I don't speed up. So, okay, so these are the high-level statistics. We launched beta at Mobile World Congress in February this year, and since then we've seen over 200 million people using apps that are built with Flutter. You can read the other numbers, but we have thousands of apps, and the popularity has continued to grow. So the rest of the keynote we structured in 4 ways, which is the process of building an application. You go from the design to the release, right? So with the design, and this is something that we'll cover live on stage in front of a lot of people, basically talked about when you get an app from a designer and you have to actually develop it, what happens, right? And I'm sure a lot of friendships have been lost in this process. Because what happens is the designer gives you an app like this and you end up shipping an app like that. And it looks kind of similar, but you can look at the top navigation, you can see kind of some of the scrolling and the pop-ups. It's just easier to use certain parts that are provided by the OEM or other things that aren't kind of widgets or custom-made properties, right? So that's something that we really want to fix and achieve something like this. So like I mentioned, a lot of people still do want to have that iOS and Android look and feel, so you can specify differences on purpose if you don't want to have just one branded experience, but still want that platform-specific look. Another thing that was announced that people got very excited about was Flare. Flare is a third-party integration from an agency called Two Dimensions. There were 2 twins on stage, and one was a developer and one was a designer, and they were identical. But basically they were saying how do you coordinate between those two, and they launched this animations platform that's free for everyone to use. And you can build these beautiful animations and then with 1 line of code have them appear on Flutter. And I don't have it on here and I'm definitely going to go over 10 minutes, but the cool part about their demo was you can move this person up and down and their skeletal structures will stay the same. And you can also have all these other custom things that if you cache the keynote, you'll definitely be able to see their demo here. The second part was develop. So once you design the app, you have to develop, right? Coding should be fun. I'm pretty sure this circled through other words, but this is the one where we're stuck with, but it's true. It should be very fun. So we showed a live coding demo during this part of the keynote. And we also announced Dart 2.1. Dart is a language that powers Flutter. Again, it wasn't as popular, and now it's becoming very popular. And the great thing about Dart, besides the fact that it compiles ahead of time and has a lot of things that make Flutter the way it is that Dart is really intuitive to learn. On the homepage of the new design website we worked on, we added Flutter for iOS developers, Android developers, web developers, React Native developers, all sorts of things, because we realized that Flutter should not be something as a developer that you're putting things aside to learn Flutter. It should be an addition to your toolkit. So you don't have to give up your identity as an iOS developer or as an Android developer or as a web developer. Dart is just like an object-oriented language. You can just learn Dart on top of those other languages and still maintain those identities. And that's something we want to stress as a team, is we don't want to you'd drink this Flutter Kool-Aid, hop on the Flutter train, and never hear about anything else, right? But we made it really easy with documentation to make that transition if you're already familiar with a certain language to learn Dart. I saw someone tweet the other day saying they're not hiring for Dart developers because it's just very quick to learn. So if you know how to code, should be fine. The third is Connect. So we mentioned about the open source and all the packages. Square also launched a couple things, a Reader SDK and in-app payments SDK for Flutter to really easily integrate and hopefully make money off your apps, because I assume not all of you are making apps just for fun. So this is a really useful tool. And finally, release. Tim showed this picture on stage. I saw him on buying this the day before the keynote. I'm like, Tim, what are you doing? You should be practicing. But now I know why. He wanted to demonstrate what CI/CD, or basically releasing your app, is like nowadays, right? Because you have the app ready, and you're like, all right, great. All I have to do is the APK, the IPA, release it on both stores. I'll be done. Yeah, right. You have to get all the screenshots. You have to basically make the app very. It's a whole process to release the app. So luckily we had a partnership with Nevercode, and they launched CodeMagic. And this is also a third-party integration to Flutter that allows you, once you build the app, to actually ship it really quickly to both iOS and Android stores. Obviously, Flutter being for both, that's a really, really good tool. You can always also use it just for one of them, and it still makes it a lot easier. And finally, maybe many of you are here for this. Oh, almost finally, sorry. Forgot. I made the slides yesterday. Flutter, beyond mobile, right? When I joined the Flutter team, the value proposition was make it, easy to build mobile apps. But, the team at the time when I joined said, yeah, but long term, that's not our vision, right? The title of this presentation is not building beautiful mobile apps, it's Google's portable UI toolkit. UI toolkit because we want Flutter to run on all screens, right? Not just mobile. If you think about your day, right, we have screens everywhere. We have screens in cars, we have screens on watches, we have screens on phones. But as a developer, you literally have to adjust to every platform, and that's so frustrating. Obviously, we're trying to solve the iOS and Android problem first, but eventually you should just be able to focus on what you love, which is building the application and design, and then have that work on a screen. So we talked about Flutter desktop embedding. This was the moment of the keynote that I heard from the New York people. You guys were, as soon as we said the whole presentation, not mine, I didn't have time to do it, but the whole Flutter presentation at 1.0 was running on a Flutter app. So we weren't using Google Slides, we weren't using PowerPoint, the whole thing was built off of Flutter, right? So we kind of exited out and showed that. And then we previewed something called Hummingbird, right? And this is where a lot of the excitement is as well, which is Flutter running on web. I mentioned earlier that unlike some of the third-party cross-platform toolkits, Flutter, the way it works, is it compiles directly to native ARM code, native machine code. But with Hummingbird, it compiles to JavaScript. So you're able to write Dart and Flutter for the web. I'm sure there'll be questions about this. So I'll skip it. So I'm done. Not sure if that was 10 minutes.
11.
I should have skipped, I don't know. All right. Learnings for next time.
Should probably countdown clock.
I should have done a countdown clock like Emily and Matt, and there would be fireworks. With, on the flight here, I was watching Mission Impossible, and Tom Cruise stops detonation a second before, and I'm like, that's Emily on stage. Literally, a second before, she's like, boom, the app worked, and then the time was up, and it was unbelievable. I was sweating. Okay, technical overview. Technical overview. So sometimes it's helpful to visualize how Flutter works. So basically, the way Flutter is built is we have this underlying engine that's powered by Skia, this graphics engine, and Darts. And everything in the green, everything else is the framework. And that's what you as a developer have full control over. So you basically can go all the way down in the code, but obviously not a lot of people have a lot of time, so what we do is we provide all these widgets. Everything in what Flutter is a widget, which means instead of starting from scratch, if you want to add scrolling or navigation, even if it's custom, you can start with one of our widgets and then start customizing that. Makes a lot of sense. But the good news is if you're really, really, really picky and nothing has been created before, you can go down and actually make something custom. Not only that, but you can also upload it, have other people use it, they'll become your best friends, you'll grow your Twitter following, it will be great. So yeah, so that's how Flutter is overview. But what I want to do now is I want to bring up Will. Will is gonna basically is our head of design. He spoke at the event, and he's gonna now talk a little bit about the demos that you saw at Flutter Live and how they built them.
And First, let me apologize. I'm a little hoarse from the after party. It was crazy in this pizza place that had karaoke and 7-foot ceilings and all these people having a really good time. And it was nuts. And we said, like, is it always like this on a Tuesday? And the waitress goes, no. So we don't even know why it was so crazy. But I also want to thank Martin Ryback and Nitya, who's not here, for arranging the viewing party that we had in New York at the Google office that I couldn't be at, but my team, Anthony and MH, also helped at. It seemed like it was a lot of fun, and I'm glad we were able to do that even though I wasn't going to be here. So I want to talk about the studies that I showed during the design segment of the talk. What are the studies? Who am I? I'm Will. I'm the Flutter engineering lead at Google in the material design department. Most people forget that we have actually more engineers than designers in material design, and we have them on web and iOS and Android. And then last year I added Flutter to that, and my team works in a partnership with Flutter on all things really having to do with design engineering for Flutter directly, as well as supporting the apps inside Google that are built with Flutter. So almost all of the examples that I showed during my section come from the material guidelines section on studies. What are these? These are hypothetical products that our designers use to stress test the design guidelines that we have, and also see what opportunities there are to extend the components to other places and practice theming and branding. You can get to it at that website that's up there, or if you just go to material.io, you'll be able to find it in the navigation. One of the things that we wanted to make really special about the Flutter Live event was that I was going to have to show a lot of all these animated GIFs, and I wanted them to be backed up by real code so that you all could go look at it later and have really rich examples of how to use material components in so many different ways for all these different actual cases. And turns out we ended up having 6, and then a couple tiny light ones on the side. And why is this important? Because this is how you can practice your Flutter. So I don't imagine that every single person that's in this room is actually working at a job where Flutter is what you're doing all day yet, but you probably want to spend more time learning and practicing Flutter. We create these studies and put the requirements up for them inside material.io so that you could go make one of these. Like the guy that I brought up during the design section, Jacob Christensen from Reflectly, one of his Flutter engineers practiced Flutter by building one of our apps called Reply, and then that was enough skill for him to end up getting a full-time Flutter job. But he didn't have an idea of his own to build out an app. And sometimes that can be intimidating when somebody says like, oh yeah, just build an app. And you're like, on what? That's not very helpful. Also, I don't have a designer. And really I should be practicing what it's like to work with good designs if I'm going to be learning something new. So these are a really good place for you to do that. We're going to be sending out a blog post with more information about them and publishing all the code for them online so that you can interact with them. But then many of them are unfinished, and that's a great place for you in the community to submit code and practice PRs and have code review from us and expand the examples to include the other sections that the designers have made that we haven't had a chance to code yet. And all of these are the studies that I used in the keynote. So the most complete studies that we had are Shrine, which you may have seen from a bunch of other things like our code labs. Rally, which was built by Anthony here. And how many days did you have to build the first version of this? 2?
3.
Yeah. Anthony did it in a hackathon, and it was like one of the best things in it. It got my highest of all of the things. And it shows a lot of cool stuff, like how to deal with those kinds of graphs and that custom navigation. And then the last one is Crane, which was built with an intern of mine and then a few people, including MH, who's not here, which shows a lot of custom things, including the tab bars and the backdrop components there and the choreography between them. So animation, I'll be honest, in Flutter is a little bit difficult to learn. There's a learning curve for it. One of the reasons why it's like that is because it's so crazy powerful. It is far more powerful and finely tunable than what I'm used to coming from iOS. I was a core animation expert. So I know what it's like to get like to the lowest level that I can get to before I'm going to OpenGL. And this is another layer lower, really. There's so many things that you can do by saying how you want things to be interpreted or lerped without having to create individual keyframes. You should look at how we're doing animations in there as examples, because there's often many different ways to do something in a framework as big as Flutter, and it's good to know all of them. So they also showed some custom drawing. Rally has a graph in it that you see right there. I never practiced drawing a chart like that, and so now Anthony has given us some code that we can use to do that. And then also, all of these are just super custom, so they don't look like that kind of like cookie cutter material design app that you get. These have all been branded and expressed through hypothetical companies' brand guidelines, which is something that you will do on a regular job. And if you practice doing that, that can be really useful once you begin. Then we had 3 that were focused on a single part of them. This one is basil. And I'll be honest with you, I misspelled spinach the first time I made this, and that was what was in our backup deck. So if the app that we had made for some reason wasn't working, we were going to go to slides, and then the entire world would have seen that I can't spell spinach. So I was so glad that there were no problems with that app. But then I saw someone on Reddit today spell it just S-P-I-N-C-H, which is just spinach. But this one was to show typography. The kind of letter spacing and word spacing, that control that we have that's up in the text style object instead of like buried down in core text. That's something that I'm not used to being able to do easily. Coming from iOS, dealing with attributed strings, again, yeah, they're a really great data type that can store a lot of information, but they are not too easy to create. They are not easy to make complicated. And also when it comes to letter spacing, I don't even think that's something that's in attributed strings. I believe you do have to go down to core text for that. And that's nuts, because that's really hard. And you would be like, well, it's just not worth it for that label. But maybe now you don't have to say, well, it's just not worth it. You can just, well, just do it. Another example that we had up for typography was Fortnightly, which is a hypothetical newspaper app. This one is just really pretty. I don't think it does anything else except prove that we can have print quality typography in Flutter. A lot of people assume when you're going to be using a tool like this, that you're going to kind of have to make a lot of compromises and maybe get some crappy results. And that's not the case with Flutter. You can have something that I would assume that was just made in, well, if I'm not mistaken, the New York Times used to make all of their stuff directly in OpenGL, so they could have complete control over what's going on with the typography, which is weird because OpenGL isn't exactly made for typography. And so I would have assumed that maybe somebody went to a lot of trouble on that for this. Didn't, made it in 10 minutes. This one was one that I also was showing because I made it so quickly. Aside from the presentation of that thing, which we call the extended bottom sheet, which I borrowed some code that was not made for this example, but made for the Shrine example, I made this in less than half an hour, kind of an emergency style on the 4 train on my way into work, with a lot of distractions and stuff. I've never been able to make something that I could put into, like, televised to thousands of people example that quickly and never have to go back to it again. There was no polish that I had to do for that to express what I needed it to do here. It's also a good example for teaching how to deal with safe areas, which, are avoiding things like the notch at the top or the home thing. I don't know what they call that on an iPhone, the home bar, and how to do that in Flutter. And then again, this is Anthony's charts here. And drawing something like that is one of those things that can be very, very intimidating. Like everybody's just like, oh, it's a line, it's just a chart or whatever. But until you practice that sort of thing, it seems like this could either be easy or this could be so hard that I'll never get it done in time. And I should ask them to just do something else or bring in a package from somewhere, just like some sort of charts package and just bring it in, which is also fine if that's what you need to do. But it's also a really valuable skill to be able to do custom drawing like that. And then we had another one that was made by Anthony Barban and his intern in Mountain View to specifically show Cupertino in action. So this is a veggies app. It lets you know what's in season, and you get to make some, like, you get to save things. That's what's going on there. Search. But as you can see, the aesthetic is expressing Apple's iOS design language, which is an official term that I found inside Apple's documentation once. They only describe what they do this once. But I'm using it. You see, the switches are iOS switches, and it'll look like Android switches. All of this stuff is, I think it looks like the sort of thing that could have just come right from Apple themselves. And so, like I said, we're working on a blog post right now where we'll have really good distribution for you all. Hopefully these are going to get into the actual Flutter gallery, which is an app that you can build and compile and run when you get the Flutter project cloned to your computer. In the meanwhile, almost all of this is already on our repo, which is Material Components Flutter Experimental. And I'm going to do a push once I get home, because I forgot, on my other computer to put even more of them up there. So while those aren't like totally done yet, you can still go look at them and see real life how we made them, which is the whole point. Oh, and that was it for my stuff. And thanks.
Thank you, Will. It's crazy. I once saw an open source project. Someone made an app that looks like iOS for Android devices and Android for iOS devices. And it was freaking everyone out because you have an iPhone and it's seeing all the Android behaviors, and that shows the flexibility of Flutter. I wanted to talk about Hummingbird a little more. We briefly mentioned it in the keynote, but there is a blog post out there that has more of these details. But it's really interesting because the blog post details, as the Flutter team, what were the things we were thinking of when we were making Flutter for the web. And these are the three kind of approaches we had to build Hummingbird. The first one was just widgets. So basically, kind of doing using all the web capabilities, but building it just in widgets. The second one was some widgets and custom layout. So as you see, provided by the render object, we have some HTML elements. And then finally, and the one that we ended up choosing was Flutter Web Engine, which would have a Dart UI underlying engine in that blue area you saw earlier where you didn't have control over, but then everything else would be a widget, so you'd have full control that would render to JavaScript. And that's what we ended up doing. So this is kind of that same diagram you saw earlier, tech-wise for Flutter for mobile, but for web. You can see that bottom one would be the Flutter Web Engine, and the top is everything you have control over. And I really encourage you to visit our blog post, especially if you are interested. Obviously, we said we're only previewing this. This isn't something that we say, oh, it's widely available right now, go build it for web. But I know people are really interested in it, so I did want to provide a little bit more context there. And there's one more.
Oh yeah, so I'll talk about this. And actually, if I can go back to that last thing, I have a hard time kind of understanding what those 1, 2, and 3 options were. Obviously, the only one that matters is 3 because that's what we went with. But I think what they're trying to express is that they tried like, can we just replace the widgets layer with web stuff? What does that look like? All the layouts still happening by, the DOM. It's all browser stuff. Well, layouts maybe not working so well. Let's try replacing the rendering layer with our stuff. And then they were like, hey, how about we go all the way down, because that seems to be the only way that we can get things to work the way people were really expecting them to. And what does that mean? So this is a hypothetical tree that could happen if your app had these widgets and stuff, where you can see the green boxes are things that come right out of regular HTML and CSS. They're dealing with the DOM. And we've taken our widgets and converted them into regular objects that way. That's what we want to do as much as possible. When you're dealing with widgets that have text in them, wouldn't it be really great if they just worked the way a web, spanner div or whatever worked for something that's nice with text in it? If we can get that to work, that's great. If you need to do something that goes beyond that, then we switch to drawing directly onto the canvas, which is a little more complicated because it's a bitmap, and you can read in the blog post on medium.com, definitely some more details on that. This is all subject to change, by the way, because this is experimental and it's in the lab, and it's not something that we're working on in the open yet until we've totally decided all the things that we're going to do. I say we, like I'm working on this. I have nothing to do with this. I'm just really freaking excited about it, and when I saw this, I was like, oh, I think I bet on the right horse here. Yeah, so that's that.
Thanks, Will. Great. So something, it's funny, when I joined the team, I had to bet all of my marketing energy to one app, which was the Hamilton Broadway musical. So anytime I'd go somewhere, I'd be like, yeah, Hamilton uses it. We use it a lot within Google as well, but now it really, really has turned, and it's no longer obviously a beta product, and that's very indicative and also in terms of who's using it. So we created this really cool assets, this video that we showed, and I'm going to show it now, which kind of highlights some of the apps since the beta launched this past February that have been built with Flutter. So obviously, you know, and we'll share a little bit more about what other apps have been built, but we have the privilege to have Clay here with us today. Clay, there he is. And we thought Clay has made an app with Flutter, and it's always great to hear firsthand from some of those experiences. So without further ado, welcome Clay.
Thanks. Hey guys, I'm Clay. I'm not a developer. I'm usually on the business side of startups, and this is my contact info. I know we're a little short on time, so if any of you non-developers need help kind of navigating the space, feel free to reach out. But what I wanted to show you was the performance of the app in real time. I just screen recorded it right before I came down here, and it is really snappy. So I started with Ionic and WordPress, and you know I was pretty happy. But the app performance was okay. That's sideways face. And the features, what I could do with it, was just not as good as what you could do with native. So I tried out Flutter, and I moved to Firebase as well of WordPress. And not only did I get the performance, but we built it once, and I got my iOS app out of the same code base. And not only that, but you know, Ionic, you build it once, and then it goes to more code bases. But more code worked when we built it in Flutter, like every time. And the other thing is the hot reload. When you're dealing with different time zones, it is so valuable to just have that kind of not send you a build and then go to sleep and have to wait for those hours. So that was a lifesaver for me. I know that's not going to be the same for every situation, but yeah, I can't say enough about the hot load. But yeah, that's my stats. I did 12 installs and 16 daily actives. So it's in preview right now. It's called Tick Tick Bucket List. But it worked like Tinder. You just can pick places that you want to go. You say, yes, I did that, or I've already done that, or I'm not interested in that. Swipe left. Any questions from the business side that I can answer real quick? For the process?
How do you make money?
So just like Tinder, there'll be some interstitial ads. And then as well, when you flip that card over, there's a description of the place, and you can click the book. And so I can send that person off to Wikipedia, or I can send them to a place to book that cruise. Yeah, go ahead.
Were you at full release under Ionic, and then how long did it take you to roll over?
I started from scratch, and I was in beta with Ionic, and it probably took me about 2 months to just rebuild it from scratch. I saved a little bit of time because I had the designs basically, but the app to build in Ionic, even I didn't get the performance, and that took about 3.5 months. So I saved, whatever, 30%, 40% of my time. All right, I think we got to move on, but thanks guys. Sorry I couldn't show you the video, but come on the 17th of January and show you the whole thing.
Yeah, and I'll go through this a little bit quickly, just So I mentioned Hamilton. That was one of the first big, I guess, wins, or they took a huge bet. The team was like, Hamilton himself, young, strappy, and hungry. He took his shot, so we're going to take one with Flutter, right? We were definitely an alpha very early on, but they took a bet with us, and it worked. They had 3 months to launch this app because that's where their touring show was starting, and that was a really hard deadline. Not only did they get it out in 3 months, but it was featured on both the iOS and Google Play stores. The app got over 1 million installs. But more impressive to me is that it's over 500,000 monthly active users, which means that over 500,000 people are going on this app monthly, which shows the retention levels, and people are happy with the app. Because you can get a lot of users by paying for a lot of ads, right? But the retention is really important. And we have, I won't show it now, but we do have a really cool case study video with the Hamilton team about this. So if you look up Hamilton Flutter, you'll find it, and I think it's great. And if you look at the pre-show for Flutter Live, I did rap a little bit of Hamilton in there at some point. So someone tweeted, "Martin, you're a rap guy." I'm like, all right, let's not go that far. That was pretty bad. But the pre-show had some also interesting content with like interviews from the Flutter team. The second one was Google Ads. So we as Google have large internal bets on Flutter. All of our ads system is built with Dart, and our ads app is built on Flutter, and that powers hundreds of billions of dollars for Google. So when people said, oh, is this an experimental project, we say ads. It's not. Google has big bets on that. We also have, and I won't show it now because again we don't have much time, but we have an Alibaba case study video as well, where you can see how Alibaba used Flutter for to power parts of their app with over 50 million daily active or downloads. So millions of devices. Will brought up Reflectly during a keynote. They're a really cool agency that our app on meditation that was featured as a top 10 meditation app on iOS. It was really great, and also they have iOS look and feel, which shows that part of it. And finally, we talk about how we have you covered. Clay just mentioned interstitials or ads. We have a lot of plugins and ways to integrate Firebase and cloud, but also a lot of things. As I mentioned, it's very open, but also partnership. So we love feedback from the community, and we're very reachable. One of the biggest things we get as a Flutter team complimented as is how open we are and how quick we are to be able to listen to your feedback and answer questions. And also, the community is so responsive. I was building a Flutter app, and so I made an alias. And I had a question, so I asked, and of course they didn't know I was on the team, and within 30 seconds someone on the Gitter chat answered and then DM'd me and said, "Hey, I love Flutter, what do you think about it?" Like, that's pretty cool, and I don't get that in many other communities, if I run it, so anyway, that was really, really cool. And then finally, I wanted to end with this, which is that there's 4 different ways you can get started with your Flutter app. A lot of people think, oh, I have to have an app idea to start with Flutter. That's not true. The first way, though, is obviously starting an app from scratch. So if you want to build a brand new app, you can build with Flutter on one code base, and it will run natively on iOS and Android. The second way is prototyping a new idea. Let's say you just have a concept in mind, and you don't care too much about design yet, or you want to design just a part of it. You can quickly build that in Flutter, test it out, see what happens, and then pivot, building your MVP. The third is bringing your app to the other platform. So you already have an iOS app built or already have an Android app. You can build for the other one and eventually merge the code bases. That's something that Topline, Abbey Road Studios, did. We actually, Flutter Live, we opened up the event with that video. That's another case study you can check out. They made a music recording app, and they already had an iOS app, and they made their Android run really, really quickly with Flutter, and now they're integrating both. And what's nice about that is once you launch the app, it's just the beginning, because every time you want to do an update to the app or launch a new feature, you have to synchronize your releases. So you have to do the same thing on both platforms. Sometimes one takes longer to approve than the other, so half your users are not happy, and they think you're A/B testing things and you're not. It's just because you couldn't release it. So with Flutter, obviously, eventually merging it's really, really easy. And then finally, using Flutter for part of your app, and that's something Alibaba did for the Design New app, which is like their eBay. So people, millions of people use this app to buy and sell things in China and other parts of the world. And what they did is they realized that their item detail page and a few other parts of the app weren't beautiful and they weren't working very well, so they just wrote those parts in Flutter, put it into their already existing app. They didn't lose any of their users, and it was a pretty flawless transition. Funny story I'll end with, which you wouldn't hear in the keynote, but we as Google have another internal app that was built natively. And this was at the beginning of Flutter. And they decided to rebuild it in Flutter and relaunch it. And to this day, users have no idea it's a Flutter app. And because that transition, it still looks exactly the same. So I thought that was pretty powerful. So thank you so much for being here, and we'll take a few questions and then we'll stick around as well. Martin over there has some mics for a couple questions.
Yeah, hi, my name is Lawrence. Do you think Flutter will participate in Google Summer of Code 2019? If no, why not? If yes, do you know maybe some mentors with whom I could connect?
So people you can connect. Let's, is it the specific, the Summer of Code events?
Yeah, Google Summer of Code
Okay.
2019.
2019, so we're going through our 2019 strategy now actually in terms of events and everything, so why don't we find you later and we can talk about that.
Okay.
Awesome, thank you. You have a question over here?
Yeah, so I have two jobs. My day job, I work in ad tech, and so I'm just curious as to when Flutter's going to release sort of native display or video support for advertising. So the first question. Second question is, at night I teach at a not-for-profit called Pursuit, it used to be called C4Q, and they help underrepresented people in New York City join the New York City tech community. I'm really excited about Flutter, and I would love to teach them Flutter. But I'm not sure when those jobs will be there. Do we know how many companies are adopting Flutter as far as hiring Flutter developers in the future?
Absolutely, sure. So the first question was on ads integration. And again, I don't have a memory because I'm not directly, in the chats with the engineering team, but I don't pay close attention to all of them. But that's definitely something we could find out online. I don't know if you have a direct answer to that, but I do know we have interstitials, we have banner ads, we have all these different ad abilities in Flutter, because I spoke at Google Marketing Live this year, which was an ads conference, so they wouldn't have given us that talk if we didn't have anything to do with ads, but I'm not particularly sure. I know Will's looking something up now on the status of it. But on the second question, so something we're really excited about is Flutter Live. I mean, until Flutter Live has been really exciting, but Flutter Live is truly that crossing the chasm point for Flutter. We had an internship position for someone on our developer relations team, and after Flutter Live, we already have 200 applications for that role alone. I'm also looking to hire another marketing counterpart to help lead Dart marketing. Shameless plug to anyone watching this. But so we know that the demand is there. We also know that someone, as I mentioned, tweeted saying that they're not even hiring for Dart developers because it's very intuitive to learn. So I think the good news is that Flutter and Dart are becoming very, very quick to learn and also are becoming more known to people. I don't know exactly the awareness, and this is the first time I have the privilege to meet all the New York City development community and designing community. So, but I do have a lot of hope in terms of being more demand and availability for people working on Flutter projects, especially for cool projects like that are very impactful. Yeah.
But the ads, did you mean totally native ads?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
All related, the same.
I don't.
Oh, it's got to be.
Yeah, well, they're not ready yet, but there is an issue you can track, which is 12114. And
Issue 12114 on GitHub. There we go.
always helps to do a +1 in there of some kind. And then also, there is some new stuff that we released around 1. People are wondering if they might be good solutions for that. I'm the wrong person to ask because I'm working that particular part of it. But maybe there is something new that we've done recently that will help bring your use case kind of like to the ready stage.
This is kind of a nebulous question, but given the different frameworks and tools like Polymer and Angular, and now this foray into the web that's being experimented with, do you see any kind of a strategic direction or consolidation? Or are you going to cultivate that variety and keep all those options going equally?
Yeah, I mean, we as Google, obviously, huge company, and there's always going to be a natural, not competition, but obviously it's not always mutually exclusive in terms of what we offer. We think that there are good use cases for different things for different situations, though. It doesn't have to be like one thing that takes over the market and competes with everything. We are, however, having a lot of conversations. I myself sit with the lead marketer for Android and the lead marketer for Chrome and for Firebase, and we kind of all are always constantly talking. So we do understand the importance of, the future positioning, and I think Google I/O is always a really good event where we're able to tell that unified narrative. But there's always going to be challenges. I think that you should just follow along, and then obviously give us feedback. But we're hoping as Flutter, we don't see it as like, oh, we want to take over another language or another cross-platform toolkit from another company. We just think like we want to make development easier. We want to make developers be able to go home by 5 p.m., not have to port apps. And so we're going to do our best job to do that, and then work out the narrative with Android and other teams to make, if there are a lot of things that we can, I don't want to use the word synergy because it's a really business term, but synergize on. We will. Cool. We'll take a couple more questions, and it's a Friday, so I'll stick around a little bit, but yeah.
I have a couple questions, but I just wanted to clarify. When you were talking about the widgets, and how they were comparable to like what iOS views would be like and what Android views, so the widgets are individually like simulating, like say a UI navigation controller or present view controller or something like that. Is that correct?
Yeah, basically, so I'll give you an example of the scrolling widget. So when you scroll on iOS, you get that bounce effect, and when you scroll on Android, you get that grayscale. How did we as Flutter do scrolling on iOS? We took a high-powered camera and recorded slow motion scrolling on an actual iOS. So we timestamped every part of it. So we popped it into a formula, out came a polynomial, and we plugged that in, and voila, we have scrolling exactly like Android or iOS does. And sometimes it's just as fast, if not faster, because it's like it has basically an algorithm. So yes, you're right, it's exact replicas of the native OEM widgets, but every time these platforms release the new updates to it, the Flutter team already has updated ours as well. So it's basically we are simulating exactly how the OEM widgets act.
Thanks for clarifying that. That just leads me to my second question is, are there widgets or are you simulating various design patterns in specific iOS, like local-centric dispatch or server notification pattern or concurrent programming? How would you work with that with Flutter?
So no, really the similarities between these things kind of stop at the visual aspects of them. We try to make sure that the APIs can do at least as much as what you'd be expecting as a developer coming from whatever platform that was. So if this was a Cupertino widget for something that looked like a UI nav bar, we would make sure that you could customize it exactly the same way with our stuff. But as far as like GCD or anything like that, there isn't any. We have not been trying to make new versions of like our async library to have the same APIs as GCD. We do expect that you're going to learn our async patterns, which are even better than GCD, and that's not a joke.
So it is asynchronous?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So like for example, because you said GCD, like yeah, you would just use the Dart version of that. Yeah.
Like do callbacks on different threads and stuff like that?
Well, no. See, everything's kind of on one thread in a way, and so it's all futures-based, which for a lot of people is actually a great improvement, something that people are familiar with. You can learn more about it, and I'm going to misspeak about it if I say too much, but it actually does simplify that model a little bit so that you kind of just ask for things to go in the way that you want them to, and then you get the results, instead of having to worry about any sort of queue management or the operations as objects themselves, or dealing with individual threads, which you shouldn't be doing in iOS anyway.
Thanks. I just have one more question, I promise. So this is the first time actually I've heard of Flutter this week. Thanks for my question. But I did say
Thanks for
something about
coming.
Web3 Dart. Are you guys working with blockchain?
Oh, do we have anything going on with blockchain?
I saw Web3 Dart on the internet somewhere.
Something I love about Flutter is, as I mentioned, it's open source, so people work on these things. Like someone was like, do you have VR? And I'm like, no, we don't. I'm like, yeah, it's issue XYZ. And I'm like, oh wow, we have VR. So, yeah, I've seen blockchain apps. There's a website, so on flutter.io/showcase, we have examples of all the apps built with Flutter, but there's also another website called itsallwidgets.com. And on there, they have like hundreds of apps built with Flutter, and I remember seeing some blockchain ones, but in terms of capabilities and integrations, it's allwidgets.com, but it's linked on flutter.io/showcase. There's a link to that website as well. Yeah. All right, we'll take, I guess, one more. There is one more.
Hi.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. In the next 5 or 10 years, where do you see Flutter going? And do you see any sort of Flutter, Flatter, or Flutter, or something else coming out that might spawn off of Flutter?
Absolutely. It's a great question, Emma. So we mentioned in the keynote, right? Like, what gets us excited every morning, wake up and work on this? I think it's amazing to see these beautiful iOS and Android applications, but as you mentioned, I think in the shorter, longer term, it's going to be beyond mobile. So we're going to start seeing it's public knowledge that Fuchsia, one of Google's operating systems, uses Flutter to power its UI and part of that. And we're also seeing Flutter just being used beyond mobile a lot even now. So in the future, our dream is that anywhere there's a screen, it's running Flutter. It could be running other things too, but that you have the ability to now build something that every day, all the time, you're building for different screens. So that's the longer term goal of Flutter, I would say. Yeah, that's how goal.
And just to echo something really exciting, you lost the little squishy part that Matthias Duarte, my VP, was talking about. When the web came out, it was a very exciting experience for a lot of people because anybody could make a web page. If you think about kind of Web 1.0, people, if they had access to anything that could serve it, could just be like, here's something I typed, here's a picture that I had to go to Kinko's to get scanned in. But then they were able to create things, and it was very democratized, as we like to say in tech. And then mobile app development is quite the opposite of that. There is not a lot of opportunity for people to play with it, and there isn't a lot of opportunity for people to come into it without a huge amount of knowledge. And so while we don't ever believe that the engineer role will change so much that they would need to have a ton of specialized knowledge to build real production apps, there is an opportunity that Flutter might help people play on mobile for the first time. So we think there might be, if things go well, a whole range of new apps that are created because you didn't have to have $2 million to hire an agency to make it. People still have $2 million and hire an agency to make it because they're a big corporation and they need a perfect app that is maintained and has this, that, and the other, but maybe you got to build something too. So that's a kind of vision that we were really looking forward to. That and this idea that maybe with the resources you have, you can build your finished app instead of your MVP anymore.
Let's hear it for Martin, Will, and Clay, our speakers tonight. So thanks everybody for coming. We're gonna still have the bar open until about 8:30, so feel free to drink and socialize and mingle and say hello to your fellow Flutter developers. And hope to see you on January 17th. Thank you.